Good morning, everybody. This is Julian Carrillo speaking. I am the program manager for Living Cultures Grant Program. And with me is also Jennifer Joy Jameson.
Hi.
And she is the program manager of the Apprenticeship Program. So we will both be presenting on our programs, on the funding that's available, sort of the guidelines to applying. And yeah, the way it's going to work, I'll move on to the next slide here. The topics for the day, we're going to give a brief introduction to the Alliance for California Traditional Arts, or ACTA, the nonprofit that we work for. With a little bit about the history and the focus and the two programs that I mentioned. And in between talking about these programs, there's going to be a question and answer session where we encourage you to ask any questions that might be coming up. We're asking everybody to write down or type out their questions in the chat box. This has given us good results in the past. So if you're on a computer, please go ahead and just type out those questions. In fact, you don't have to wait until the question and answer session for that. You can actually, if something comes up, just write it down, or just type it out, I'm sorry, and we will answer your questions in the moment that's appropriate. If you're calling in and you're not on the computer and just listening in, then what we decide is that we're going to open it up for your questions at the very end. So we will unmute everybody so that you can ask away. Okay, so thanks for your patience on that. If anybody has any questions about any technical issues with BlueJeans, this software we're using, you can go ahead and also put in the chat box any questions, and Jennifer, who is reading those and answering and monitoring our activity there, she'll be happy to help. So a little bit about ACTA. The Alliance for California Traditional Arts has been around for more than 20 years, supporting artists and cultural communities throughout the state. We work statewide, and our offices are in Fresno, San Francisco, and LA. Jennifer is in the Los Angeles office. I'm in the San Francisco office, and the rest of our staff is in Fresno and kind of divided between that and LA. There's 13 of us, and soon to be, there's going to be a 14th member joining. We are a relatively small organization that does a lot of work throughout the state. So we're one of the few organizations focused on this kind of work, and we try to reach every county possible year after year. So if you have any questions, you can always reach out to us directly. And this is with this number, mails as well. So what is ACTA? Like I said, we're a nonprofit that promotes and supports cultural traditions. And we do this by way of providing advocacy, resources, and connections for folk and traditional artists. What are the folk and traditional arts? Well, for us, this means arts and practices that are rooted in a common heritage, a language, a religion, or region or occupation as well. They reflect shared aesthetics as well as a collective wisdom, and they affirm community wherever they are reproduced and shared. In the past, we have worked with Pacific Islander and Native American communities, as some of these pictures show. We've also worked with many groups from Asian heritage and traditions, as well as Latino, Latinx, and Latina traditions from many, many different origins. As some of these pictures show, we promote all kinds of expressions, including dance, music, culinary arts, as you can see here in the bottom right picture, as well as material culture, what we we refer to material culture, which is anything ranging from architecture to costumes to actual instrument making or any other kind of materials. We've also promoted and worked with European and Middle Eastern groups and communities and nonprofits. And also we've worked with people who promote their occupational traditions. By that we mean that regardless of the culture you're coming from, sometimes the work you do binds you to a community. In this case, here's some leather workers who have shared their work. And of course, people of the African diaspora have been very involved, and we promoted their work. And this includes the Caribbean, of course, even South America, but African Americans and other groups. The first thing on our agenda here, moving along, is to talk about the Living Cultures Grants Program, which is like I said, the grant program that I manage from the San Francisco office. And this program is focused on community dynamics more than anything. In 2020, we're going to be making approximately 40 grants of up to $5,000 to as many groups as possible. We usually get about 100 applicants a year, and we try to fund about half of that, or up to 40. So that's what's in store for this year. The grants that you might get can support activities between January 1st, 2020 and December 31st, 2020. That's the time frame that we ask your project to be within. The proposals are now it's an open call for proposals, so you can submit your proposal from now all the way until July 15th. And for the first time ever, we're actually doing this process online. We're making it available online. And we're going to have a few minutes to talk about that and actually show you what our online portal looks like towards the end of this presentation. I should also add that we also accept hard copies that you can mail in. That's how we've been doing it in the past. There's a PDF online. You download that, you fill it out, and you send us by mail, directly your paperwork. We do encourage you to do it online just because that will save time. It also streamlines the process. And we think that it might be beneficial in other ways too. We should also add that it does not matter if you apply online or on paper, your application is going to be reviewed the same. And this information about online goes for the apprenticeship program too. A few considerations about the Living Cultures program. You're going to need to provide a budget, an organizational budget, and that budget has to be less than $250,000 a year that your organization makes. So that is a consideration. The things that we promote here through this program are cultural continuity, sustainability, and engaging and strengthening communities. We are also looking for grant proposals or projects that are going to have an impact beyond the grant period, ideally. What do we fund? Well, as you can see here, workshops and gatherings. We also can fund projects for the conservation and creation of traditional arts items. This includes intergenerational classes and communal educational programs, as well as mentorships and travel costs within California, as well as other types of activities and projects that lead to cultural continuity. We also promote practices that are sustaining these communities through the purchasing of equipment or materials, the documentation of your art, whether it's beliefs, ceremonies, skills, or performances. and that can result in investment, in future revenues, as well as learning new skills. Other types of practices that lead to long-term sustainability are encouraged. We're also looking for projects that engage and strengthen your own community as well as engage others. So a public component to your project is important, such as public presentations, concerts, festivals, or exhibits. This is an important slide. What don't we fund? Well, we don't offer funding for general operating support or projects whose main purpose is fundraising, as well as projects that are limited to a historical emphasis, as you can see here on the screen. Also, projects based on an interpretation of a cultural tradition are not something that we tend to fund. Of course, every practice is based on the interpretation of a tradition per se, but what we mean by this specifically is we're looking for cultural activities and practices that are alive in your community or culture already, and that has a continuous interpretation, rather than projects that are looking to the past to recreate something that has been completely lost. So that's what we mean by this. Also, we do not fund projects that are based in educational institutions, or we cannot fund out-of-state travel or one-on-one apprenticeships. For that, we encourage you to look into the Apprenticeship Program, which Jennifer will talk to you about in just a few minutes. So also, we don't fund more than one proposal per organization, and proposals from multiple components don't qualify either. Lastly, you are not eligible if you're a current grantee of these foundations: the Walter and Elise Haas Fund, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and the CERDNA Foundation. Who is eligible? California-based 501c3 nonprofit organizations are eligible, but if you don't have that designation and you're just a cultural group or organization, you can get a fiscal sponsor, so a nonprofit organization, to be your fiscal sponsor. So you don't necessarily have to have the designation of 501c3, but if that's the case, you do have to get somebody, a nonprofit, to be your fiscal sponsor. Like I said earlier, organizations have to have a budget beneath $250,000 per year. And if you have received Living Cultures funding consecutively in the last 3 years, we ask you to sit out 1 year before reapplying. So what happens when you decide to apply for this program? Well, the first thing we encourage you to do is to reach out to us. In this case, if you're interested in the Living Cultures, reach out directly to me to talk about your project, to see if it's a good fit. Then, once we determine if it is, and you go ahead and start the application, you can decide to do that, like I said. You can do that online or on paper, but you fill out the application, then you turn it in by July 15th, right? Once we receive your application, the first thing that we do is that we review it, make sure that it's complete, and then we actually pass these on to a review panel. And like this slide says, this is a friendly process, and we welcome first-time applicants. But the review panel is composed usually of five people, and they're all experts on cultural transmission and tradition. And sometimes they are artists themselves. And so they are familiar with California's traditional cultural landscape. So you can rest assured that when your project, when your grant proposal is read by these experts, they will have, to a degree, a familiarity with the cultural transmission that you're talking about or that your project involves. They might not be experts in your specific community or even the tradition you're proposing. That's why it's important to be as clear as possible in describing it in your proposal, but they will be people who are sensitive to these practices and knowledgeable, okay? And what they'll be looking for are these 6 things, basically. They're looking for a project that shows that there's artistic quality and traditionality. They're also looking for cultural significance. That is, that your project has meaning for a community in which it's practiced in. They're also looking for cultural expertise and that your project is viable, that if you're awarded, this money is going to actually allow you to do the project. They're also looking to see what kind of impact and how you're going to evaluate that impact, as well as that you have community support and that there's a long-term benefit. So these elements right here are things that we would like you to develop in your proposal. And the questions that are on the application encourage you to answer these in detail, okay? So once your proposal is in the hands of the panel, they're basically going to score it and make recommendations. Out of the 100, which of these are recommended for funding? Then when we put together this list, we then send it to our board for final approval. That happens around December. And once they approve, we then notify who's been awarded and who hasn't, okay? The application, like I said, is now available online. We encourage you to do it through there, but you can also do it as a hard copy. The application itself consists of these elements. There's a proposal cover page with contact info and such. There's a narrative with a set of questions asking you about your tradition and your project. There's also a budget. There's 2 budgets actually, one for your project and one for the organization. There's also a place to upload or request letters of community support. And we also ask if you're a nonprofit to submit proof of your tax exempt status or your tribal status as well. Lastly, there's an important component, which is work samples and description. We ask you to provide us with either video or photographs of your practice and descriptions. I can't stress enough that descriptions are very important for each of those samples you provide. Lastly, we have an optional component, which are supplementary materials. For example, if you had a festival last year and you made brochures for that, well, you can include that in your application to show us if it's relevant, for your project. Like I've been saying, requests are up to $5,000 in total. And in terms of your budget, the total income and total expenses should be equal. There is an example provided in the application, and here's part of it. As you can see here, this is just a sample budget for the project, for a sample project. Okay? This is available online, so I'm not going to spend too much time with it. But it's basically showing us what money you're asking for, how much is the project going to cost, so we can get an idea of how the $5,000 you're requesting is going to be used. Timeline, the most important deadline is July 15th at midnight, basically, at 11:59 p.m., because that's when the application will close. Before that, we welcome questions and emails and phone calls. Okay, so please don't be shy and just reach out to us if you haven't so already. Then, like I said earlier, notifications, if you're awarded or not, will be sent out early January 2020. And remember that the grant period is for projects that go from January 1st, 2020, all the way to December 31st, 2020. And with that, I'll open it up for questions. If you haven't already, please write down or type out your questions in the chat box, and Jennifer will communicate those with me.
We don't have any questions at the moment, but I'm sure we'll get a few in just a moment here.
Okay.
Oh yes, someone says, I have a question. Natalia?
Yeah. Can I ask a question verbally or does it need to be written down?
That's fine, go for it.
Okay, thanks. I'm like, it's kind of lengthy. Thank you.
Okay.
My question is about the request for an organizational budget. I am trying to, I'm attending this webinar just to kind of familiarize myself better with this grant opportunity, since quite a few of the groups that have classes or community events at La Peña are not quite an organization, but they've been consistent for many, many years. And I wonder, as their fiscal sponsor for, hopefully a few groups that will hopefully apply, how can I advise them as far as their organizational budget goes? Or do we, as a fiscal sponsor, need to provide our organizational budget, which exceeds the $250,000? Can you explain that a little bit better?
That's a great question, Natalia. Thank you. So, as La Peña can serve as a fiscal sponsor for as many organizations as needed. So, or organizations or cultural groups in this case, So for the project budget, if an organization that uses your space, or you're acting as a fiscal sponsor, if that project is going to involve the purchase of certain materials, that and other aspects of the project, that would compose the project budget, basically. So, and it doesn't have to be, a lot of money. Some projects are smaller, right? So, as long as they detail or list and describe what this project that they're proposing entails, where they're expecting to get some money, including some ACTA money, as we saw. I'll turn it back to the sample budget. So if you can see on the screen here, the first thing in income is the ACTA request, right? The $5,000. But below that, you would list, or the organization would list, or the cultural group, any other funding that they're considering. And if there isn't any, that's fine too. We just want to see how much you're thinking that this project is going to require, and how much you're considering that you might get. I don't know if that answers the question about the project budget.
Thank you. I mean, it does help clarify the project budget, but I actually meant to say organizational budget. So you request a project budget and an organizational budget, and for these small groups that don't really have one, how would they?
Yeah, my suggestion would be for that, I mean, the fiscal sponsor is going to have to provide the budget for the organization. But
so even though our organization is over the $250,000 as a fiscal sponsor, we would just provide our own organization's budget.
That's what we've been doing in the past. But you know what? I'm going to double check with that, because it might not make sense to have that anyways, because if you're an organization that does many kinds of activities, that would be just a lot of information for our review panel to delve into. So, what I'm going to say for now is that I'm gonna have a definitive answer by the end of the day, and I will email everyone who's participating in this, just so I can have just to double check on this, because this is something that has been asked recently as well. So I just want to double check.
Okay. We've got a few other questions in the chat box that I'm going to we got four, so we'll get through them quickly. The first is from
Okay.
Liliana. She asks, why are you not eligible to apply if you are a current grantee of the Hewlett Foundation?
Okay, good question, Liana. Basically, we also get money from Hewlett. So it's like if you're applying, getting money from the same organization or from the same foundation in this case. And so it's one of the factors that they've asked us not to allow sort of this same organization to get money from the same foundation twice. And I apologize for that, but that's just the way it's one of the criteria for our own funding.
Okay, Liliana says thank you. The next question is from Marta. Marta says, if a nonprofit organization is a fiscal sponsor for a cultural group, can the nonprofit organization also apply for the grant themselves?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I believe so. And I'm sorry I don't have a definitive answer. I'm also going to look into this to provide you with the latest. But an organization should not be penalized for serving also as a fiscal sponsor, because that is another role. And so I believe that's the case, but I'm going to double check, Martha, and I will also get back to you on that.
Okay, we have a question from Eric Mendoza. Eric asks, are events that are ticketed funded? They are traditional in nature, but there is an entrance fee, so wondering if this is something that ACTA does not allow unless the funding is used for a free event of the same nature.
Hi, Eric. It's a good question too. It does not matter if it's ticketed or not. They don't necessarily have to be free events, but they are. We do fund projects that are public. If part of your strategy for reproducing these cultural practices and traditions is to raise money in other ways, that's fine. The only thing I would say, and we should talk about your project specifically just to be sure, but I would say that if the event is specifically for fundraising, it does not, we can't, it doesn't qualify. Does that make sense? If, however, it's something that's just part of the organization, it's fine. We do. There's examples of that in the past.
Great. Unless anyone has, I think we have maybe another minute if anyone wants to unmute themselves and voice a question. Otherwise, we're good.
Oh my gosh, I'm asking another question. It's Natalia from La Peña again. I feel like I've been so excited and looking forward to this webinar because it's such a wonderful opportunity for so many groups. And so I'm just trying to make sure I anticipate some of the questions I might get from some of my the cultural groups that I want to support. And
thanks, Natalia.
Yes,
of course.
And one of the questions that has come up for me is as far as these groups that I feel like I need to formulate my question in I'll let somebody else go, and I'm going to formulate my question into the chat actually for this.
Chat? That's perfect. We'll have a chance.
Let somebody else go.
Okay. I think it's actually time to move along to the apprenticeship section, but we'll take questions again after that for both of the funding opportunities. So I'll proceed with the apprenticeship program, and thanks to those of you who are individual artists who've been patiently waiting. So why don't you go ahead and tab forward, Julian? Okay. So the apprenticeship program, unlike, while the Living Cultures grant program is an organizational grant, it's a project grant for organizations, 501c3s and tribal communities. The Master Apprentice Apprenticeship Program is for individual artists. It is a $3,000 contract that goes directly to the master artist to really take time with a trusted apprentice and really focus closely for up to a year, from 6 months to a year, on really thoughtful cultural transmission of a particular cultural practice, cultural form. Who can apply? The master and the apprentice will generally self-select. I think we can certainly, if you're kind of scratching your head and you have an idea, but I don't quite know who might be the correct master artist, if you're more likely an apprentice or vice versa, we can certainly come to the table with you and do a little brainstorming and sharing out of ideas. But generally, a master artist and an apprentice are already, sort of know each other or have worked together before, or sort of a part of an extended community of practice. And the master and the apprentice will apply to the program together via one application. And as I mentioned before, recipients of the apprenticeship program have 6 months to a year. This will be in the 2020 calendar year. 6 months. You get the contract at the beginning of the year, and you will be working together at a pace that works for you all, sort of self-defined pace of somewhat regularly working together for at least 6 months. But of course, you can take up to the full 2020 year. You must be a resident of California, and the master artist must be authorized to work in the U.S. Go ahead and skip forward. These are elements that aren't really a good fit for our apprenticeship program. So specifically, studio crafts, fine craft, or the reproduction of antiques, work that is sort of involved in the recreation of historic or village folk traditions that attempt to reenact lifestyles from the distant past. So really, the apprenticeship program is about cultural sustainability of living cultural forms. And then, of course, if you received the program last year, 2019, we ask you to take 1 year's break before you can apply again. Page forward. All right, so it's a similar review process as Living Cultures. So we receive the applications. We take time and review and make sure that everyone is eligible to have their application move forward to panel review, where we bring in cultural experts that can really, really offer insightful perspective and feedback to a range of cultural expressions, but oftentimes we'll have experts in particular areas that kind of round out the panel. These folks are often previous recipients of the apprenticeship program, artists and cultural practitioners themselves, or cultural workers, or scholars that are really familiar with these frameworks and cultural frameworks and forms. Go back. And then we take, the panel will make recommendations. We'll take that to the board, our board of directors. They will make an approval, and then we'll begin to notify folks at the start of the 2020 calendar year. Go ahead. Here's the review criteria for a really good apprenticeship program. Apprenticeship application takes these things into deep consideration. Traditionality of the art form, artistic quality, both of the master and the apprentice. So to be clear, both master and apprentice will come with work samples. That's part of the application. So it's really about deepening a proficiency that's already there for an apprentice. So a good apprentice for our program isn't someone who's starting at square one, but is someone who has some some proficiency in the form or a similar form, you can really kind of then deepen it with a particular focus on, say, a particular repertoire or particular style or technique through that one-on-one study between master and apprentice. Commitment and skill, shared community membership, feasibility of the work together. So, for instance, if you're an apprentice and you want to work with, if you're an apprentice in Northern California and you want to work with a master artist in Southern California, that presents some challenges. So I think we'd have to think really thoughtfully about how to kind of frame the work together, right? So that might be more challenging than someone who's a county over or something like that. And then, of course, urgency. So particularly if there are art forms that are more endangered, that is something that is certainly taken into consideration. And tap forward. Julian? Julian?
Yeah, did it go through?
It didn't go through. And tap forward.
I'm at the application one.
Oh, okay. It's okay. We're good now. Thank you. Okay, so the application, as I mentioned before, is one application that both master and apprentice will respond to. So there will be a section for a general description for the work that you all want to do together, what you really are kind of honing in on your apprenticeship. And then there'll be a section for both the master to respond to some reflective questions and the apprentice to respond to some reflective questions. You'll also present work samples, and there's lots of detail and support information about what we're looking for there on the application itself. But oftentimes videos, images, audio recordings. Each artist needs to send in one letter of support, at least one letter of support, but you can send up to 2 per artist that really kind of can vouch for the skill and readiness of both master and apprentice to serve in this capacity. And you may also send in some optional support materials like brochures or flyers or newspaper clippings. And again, the budget for this is $3,000. This is paid directly to the master in 3 installments. So the first installment is paid after we do an orientation with each of you to sort of get you geared up. And then we'll do a midpoint site visit where we'll actually come visit with you all, record an interview, do a little bit of fieldwork documentation about of you two in practice or in studio, whatever it might be, and also just check in and make sure everything's going well and answer any questions, and then gear you up for the final section of the apprenticeship cycle, which is sort of a public sharing of some kind. It's really a pretty low-key, flexible format where you can kind of figure out what is a simple way to kind of share out, especially the apprentices' learnings in your community, whether that's a little presentation at a library or some kind of community-based exhibition or, a talk or a demonstration. Really flexible. Okay, you can tab forward. Okay, and about that 3,000, you'll see the 3,000 is the grand total at the bottom, but within that 3,000, pairs can identify a portion of that to cover materials or mileage reimbursement, travel expenses. So for instance, if the apprentice is, 2 counties over, a handful of hours away and, need some mileage reimbursement, you can identify that out of that 3,000. But we really would like to see most of the funds go directly to the master artist fee for taking that time and really valuing their time in that way. Please tab forward. Okay, so the timeline is exactly the same as the Living Cultures timeline. We're on the same cycle here. So the deadline also for the apprenticeship applications is July 15th at the end of the day. And these applications, for those applications that are funded, folks will begin their work at the start of 2020, or can begin as early as start of 2020 and can work through December 2020. And tab forward. Oh, and this is our chance to make sure that you know, you can stay well connected to us via our online monthly newsletter. You can subscribe on our website, which, by the way, we're getting a brand new website next month. It's been a journey, but that will be really great to launch and much easier to browse. You can also join us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and always just reach out to us with any questions or ideas that you have. Go ahead and tab forward. As Julian mentioned, we are a statewide organization. We have 3 offices. We have San Francisco, where Julian is based, a Fresno headquarters, and the Los Angeles office, where I am based. But really, you can reach us at any of those numbers. We'll make sure to connect up with you. And tap forward. Okay, and here's where we can take questions. And I want to mention that we will be sure to show you a little preview of the online application, since that's new this year, and we're glad to answer any technical questions about the online application, and we're really looking forward to making that process much smoother for the applicants. I see one question. Natalia says, do you have any bilingual Spanish and English and or POC grant writers to recommend? Oh, wow. Okay, so I think that Julian's going to be a great resource for you on that, and I think that he can follow up with you directly. I think we definitely probably have some good folks we can recommend. If anyone has any other questions, please do place it in the chat box, or you can unmute yourself and I'll respond that way. Okay, Katie says, is it possible to apply for both of these funding opportunities? And I believe yes. I don't believe it's a conflict. So if you are with a nonprofit that is applying for a project grant via Living Cultures, you may apply that way. And then if you have your own artistic practice independent of that organization, you may also apply for the apprenticeship program. What we cannot do is we cannot fund organizations via the apprenticeship program. Oh, Kati, thank you for that pronunciation correction. Any other questions? I'm going to go ahead and try and unmute everyone in case anyone's confused on how to unmute themselves. Okay. Right. All right. Any other questions about the apprenticeship program or Living Cultures or the online application?
If we have further questions, who should we call? Should we call the Los Angeles number? Because we're down here in Southern California.
Great question. So the way to get the best answer for your question is probably to tailor your question specific to the program, right? So if you have an apprenticeship program question, please reach out to me because I manage that program. My contact information is on the screen here.
Okay.
If you have a Living Cultures question, Julian is your guy. He's the program manager for the Living Cultures program. but, you know, if you have, you know, I think we all kind of keep the flow of communication. So if you want to talk to both of us, we can do that, especially if there's like a regional question that you have. We can all hop on the phone or, you know, we're flexible that way.
Thank you.
Yeah. Eric says, can you save your work online on the online application and work on it later? And is there a sample application we can download? Great question. Yes, you absolutely can work on it and save it as you go. So, Julian, why don't you go ahead and tab over, to our, so here you can see this is an application for living cultures, and the same application is for the apprenticeship is also available via a program called Submittable. So when you click over to either of these applications and you want to start an application, if you scroll down, you'll see once we get down there, once you click apply, it will prompt you to create an account. And once you've created an account and started filling out an application, you can save it at any time and return to it.
I can show you that part, the saving at the very bottom, but it is possible, Eric. Like, so that's the whole application, but at the very bottom you'll see that option to save.
Save draft.
After you've created your account.
In terms of a sample application, I think probably the simplest thing to do here is to either print up the application as you see it, if you need to reference it, or, you know, share it out with either your master or apprentice or your organization. Alternately, you can download our PDF of our hard copy version of the application, which is formatted slightly different. And there are a few extra kind of like digital related questions on the online application that aren't on the PDF. But generally, it's the same content, so you can reference it there as well. And we're glad to answer any other questions related to both the hard copy version and the online application.
Should I go through the online application real quick?
Yeah, could you also show the apprenticeship version as well for folks? And Eric also says, the letters of community support for Living Cultures grant, can they be from fiscal sponsor as well or community members?
Good question too. We leave that open to you. What we're looking for is for people to attest that this project you're proposing is a meaningful project and actually has that support. So if the person who has that insight works for the fiscal sponsor because you've developed a relationship with them, they know your work, you use their space, well, that's perfect, you know? If it's your grandmother or your grandfather, someone who has been involved in the tradition for a long time and wants to attest, wants to show that you are you and your project, you know, are doing something to move it forward, then a letter from a family member also works. It's really an open category. So what we're seeing here on the page online on the screen is the living culture one. It's a little bit longer because it requires more information about the organization. But as Jen said, we have here the apprenticeship program. And I'll show you that. Here it is. I don't know if it's showing already.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
yeah,
with the program description.
With the apprenticeship program application, again, both master and apprentice are applying together, but because it's an online application, essentially either one of you will really kind of steward the submission of filling out the application with the relevant information and sort of hitting submit in that way. Can you keep scrolling? So as we scroll down to the application, you'll see information about work samples, letters of support. Once you answer these eligibility questions, you'll fill in some basic information about the general plan that you have for your apprenticeship. You'll describe the form and give us some basic details, and then there'll be a series of questions for the master artist and a series of questions for the apprentice, and work samples for the master artist, work samples for the apprentice, and then you'll fill out that budget, and that's about it.
Any other questions you might have? I know I'm scrolling through this really fast, but once you create an account and you log in, you'll have plenty of time to explore. And one thing we should add is that if you have any technical issues with this form when applying, please reach out to the submittable team. Their email is at the top of the application, or both. But if you have questions with the application content, that is our task, Jennifer's and mine, to answer those. So please feel free to reach out. Any questions you might have. Mm-hmm. This is a good place to make sure that you can count on us.
Natalia asks, is there a Spanish application? So Natalia, we currently have the hard copy version available in Spanish for 2020, and we're working now on finalizing the Spanish version of the online application. So we're hoping to get that up shortly as well.
Yeah, that's going to be out soon, and it's going to be a mirror copy of this English version, but just in Spanish. And speaking of that, you can contact me if you need Spanish language assistance, including for the apprenticeship. I can help out with that too. Here we're getting in an online form to some of the parts where we ask you to submit work samples. As you can see here, there's the instructions and then a little bit of description of what we're expecting or what we want.
Yeah, and just a word about work samples. We're not expecting anything professional. Don't need to go out and hire a photographer, videographer, anything like that. But certainly, send us the best media that you have that is sort of within your reach. So, for instance, if you are a dancer, sending us a video of you dancing, we want to make sure that it's well enough lit, that the video isn't cutting off your feet, simple things that really make a big difference in sort of the review process, and really just understanding the context of the work and really kind of gauging your skill really go a long way. And descriptions of work samples are also helpful as well. So Julian, if you click choose files, you folks can see, say you choose a random file. Folks can see that's where you'll fill out some other details about that image or that other form of media. All right. Well, I think
once you submit,
if there aren't any other questions, just know that we're here. We're here to hear your ideas, to answer questions large and small, and And we look forward to seeing what you have in mind. We look forward to reading your applications and to getting to know the work that you're doing in your communities.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. And we're
And
going
as
to,
I promised,
Thank you.
yeah, and we're going to post this online on our website as well.
Great.
Thank you.
and you know what? If those that were interested in those questions that I wasn't able to answer, I do have some answers for that. If you want to stick around, do we have a few minutes?
Mm-hmm.
We do.
Okay, great. So, I think it was Martha that had asked a question about if there's a limit to the number of cultural groups that an organization acting as a fiscal sponsor can help out. The answer is that we don't have a limit. So in the case of La Peña, right? Natalia, you were asking also like serving in this function. You can be serving in that capacity to multiple cultural groups. Okay. And can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yes, she says yes.
Okay. Thanks. I'm just wasn't sure. But also in terms of, I think Natalia asked about this. In terms of an organization that's serving as a fiscal sponsor, but also interested in applying for their own Living Cultures grant, that is fine. They can do that. So it's not common, but it is. But I mean, it can happen. It's allowed. So, for example, again, using the case of La Peña, you can be a fiscal sponsor, but also if you have a project of your own that you want to submit, you can do that too. And then lastly, for the other question about cultural group applying without 501c3 status and what budget we're requiring, we're actually, for organizational budget, we're asking for the applicant's budget. So it's not the fiscal sponsor's budget. Does that make sense? I think that Natalia had asked this question.
Yeah, I had asked that one about that. One of our organizations has already asked us to provide a budget for them just to prepare for applying for this grant. And so I was wondering if that's something we do need to do is provide La Peña's budget as a fiscal sponsor. So the answer is no, we don't. And
Exactly.
if they don't have their own budget, they don't have to provide that necessarily either.
Exactly. Well, actually, what you would do, it all depends, right? It all depends on, because there's many kinds of activities and groups. But if an organization, or a cultural group that does not have the 501c3 designation and is working with the fiscal sponsor, if they have a small project budget, that's one thing. And I kind of showed an example of that. And if they're required to submit also an organizational one, even if those two look the same. So for example, if it's a cultural group that it's their first project that they're ever doing, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's going to be fine if their project budget is very similar to their organizational, because, it's kind of expected, right? But if the cultural group has had, other activities throughout the year, and they've raised some money and they spent some money on those activities, then the organizational budget is just going to reveal a little bit more of what that cultural group has been involved in. So it might be still very similar to the project budget, but there's going to be a little bit more info that can help us. when reviewing your application.
That helps. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for these questions.
All right, we're at 1, so maybe we'll sign off and look forward to speaking with each of you more individually.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can we get a copy of this presentation? Or is there a webinar
Yes,
link?
we can. Yes, we're going to be sharing this out. We'll just send it directly to your email for those that signed up.
Awesome.
Also, I should add, especially for those interested in the Spanish version, we did a Spanish webinar last week, and we uploaded it to YouTube. I can also share that out, or we can, through an email. So that has the same content, but just in Spanish for both the apprenticeship and the living cultures.
Oh yes, that I would be interested in both.
Great. Okay. Maybe I'll just forward that link to everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.